Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to be talking about The Walking Dead Season 6 finale, and what, if any, takeaways are there from this episode that we can extrapolate to an understanding of the reconstruction of society after a large-scale disaster scenario. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so there really is a lot to talk about here, but as always I have to provide a disclaimer because if I don't, I'm going to get a lot of comments about things that I don't address or that I omit, so I want to make sure I cover all my bases. Now the first thing and the most obvious criticism that I get when I reference pop culture is that it's fake, it's fiction, it's not real life. How can you pertain that to real life scenarios? And yes, I gather that it's fake, but at the same time, as one of my most esteemed subscribers has commented in the past, is that these fictional renditions provide us a common language to understand these theoretical situations, and even if we can only take 5 to 10% of that and apply it to real life, then it's useful. And I think it was Andy Warhol who said life imitates art, or art imitates life, something to that effect. So yes, it very much can be useful in our analysis of shit hits the fan situations. And I also want to say that there may be some spoilers in this video, so if you haven't seen it yet, then I suggest that you do that before watching this, but certainly come back and watch this because we're going to talk about some real world applications for this stuff. Alright, so we're already at the end of the 6th season, at the dawn of the 7th season, so suffice to say that only the strongest of humanity have survived from this point. So all the wheat has been separated from the chaff. All of those who remain on the planet right now are hardened survivors for the most part. And zombies are no longer the central antagonists. Ever since that night in Alexandria, if you remember that episode where they basically just went ape and killed like 1,000 zombies melee style and they came out of it unscathed, it pretty much set the precedent that zombies are no more an issue for the hardened survivors. And so the actual human threat has taken center stage over the mindless hordes. So for me, and for most people, I think the zombie is a metaphor for a resource scavenger. And further into the collapse, of course, the less you have to fear the scavengers, because inevitably they get thin from the herd, they get taken out pretty easily, and the more you have to then fear the organized criminal element. While the mobs are looting and plundering, it's the conquerors who are actually planning and scheming and devising plans for how they can fill the power vacuum once all the smoke clears from the initial chaos. So it's the organized criminal element that Rick now fears the most. The zombie element is pretty much all but extinct in the video. They throw them in there once in a while, but they're just sort of filler for the main plot line, which revolves around these hardcore antagonists and an increasingly powerful antagonists. It was very hard for them to one-up the termites at Terminus, the cannibals. You know, after cannibals in a post-apocalyptic film, there isn't a lot of ways you can top that, and the only way you can really top it is if some ruthless regional leader that we're going to talk about here. So first off, I want to explain the thumbnail and the title of this video with respect to the NWO factor. So for this, I have to recite what Negan says to Rick in this finale. So basically, Negan has Rick's group on his knees and he's surrounded by 100 of these guys with guns. There's no chance that they're going to weasel their way out of this situation. And he says to him, he says, "You see, Rick, whatever you do, no matter what, you don't mess with the New World Order. The New World Order is this, and it's really very simple. So even if you're stupid, which you very well may be, you can understand it. You ready? Here it goes. Pay attention. Give me your shit, or I will kill you. Today was career day. We invested a lot so that you would know who I am and what I can do. You work for me now. You have shit, you give it to me. That's your job. Now I know that is a mighty big nasty pill to swallow, but swallow it you certainly will. You ruled the roost. You built something. You thought you were safe. I get it. But the word is out now. You are not safe. Not even close. In fact, you are pegged. More pegged if you don't do what I want, and what I want is half your shit. And if that's too much, you can make, find, steal more, and it will even out sooner or later. This is your way of life now. The more you fight back, the harder it will be. So if someone knocks at your door, you let us in. We own that door. You try to stop us, and we will knock it down. You understand? So this is Negan's message to Rick. So what can we take from this? Now, were we to put on our conspiracy theorist hat for a second here, it wouldn't be very hard to draw parallels between what Negan is saying and how that's analogous to the global Pax Americana situation as it is today. First off, he's saying that, we are the New World Order and this is just how it is. And so that's analogous to the fact that basically Rick's group is an outcast in a greater system, in a greater global system. Now, obviously, Negan is probably, his reach is only regional in scope, so probably not even statewide, although we don't necessarily know yet. So it's pretty clear that Negan is the tyrannical ruler of the post-apocalypse in this region anyways, and Rick's group is kind of like a mosquito that he has to swat away, kind of like the terrorists. I'm going to get more into that after. So another parallel we can draw here with the whole NWO predictive programming aspect is how, Negan talks about how we invested a lot to reveal ourselves to you. So many might see that as being very similar to the theory that the quote-unquote Illuminati injects different symbology and sort of arcane esoteric allusions to their occultic ideas into mainstream media. So they insert numbers and different symbols and stuff like that to reveal themselves to the masses. That's the whole meaning of the word apocalypse, also, is the great revealing. Another interesting thing to note, in the same vein of it being a more global endeavor, is that Negan's group is very diverse, and they really try to emphasize this point when they go around the group, and it's people of all different racial backgrounds. It's not drawn together by any really apparent characteristic or physical characteristic like some smaller groups might be bonded. Rather, when you take things to a regional level or even a national level, or what the quote-unquote NWO is trying to do now and take things to an international level, there's the diversity factor. So as groups become larger and broader in scope, they become more ideologically bonded as opposed to just sharing common physical characteristics. So the bond becomes more ideological. Now, if we look at evolution, The Walking Dead, in its progression to where it's gone from season 1 to season 7, is in many ways analogous to the evolution of the human species, such that at the beginning in season 1, Rick starts out as a lone survivor. Then he finds his group. Then that group finds the camp, where they stay, and then they go to a farm. Then, of course, Woodbury comes into the picture, then Alexandria, and so on and so forth. The scale of their communities gets increasingly broader in scope, and so does the threats. So take, for instance, I think it was the second episode, you have the one lone villain, and that's Merle. And then, of course, you start getting the zombies thrown at you, and I think it was episode 3 or 4 where you had the Vatos, or that was the, inner city Hispanic gang, which was a smaller gang. And then, of course, you have the farm incident where it was just overrun by 1,000 zombies. That was kind of the start of the upping the ante of how many zombies they would show on screen at once. Then, of course, you have the governor at Woodbury, which was a closed system, so it wasn't a community that was networking with other communities. Then, of course, you get to the level of psychopathy with Terminus, and you go broader and broader in scope to Alexandria, and now we're on the regional level with Negan, the Hilltop, the Kingdom, Alexandria, these different communities who formed a sort of regional trading system, with, of course, Negan's group being the primary bullies or extortionists at the top of that pyramid. Based on this trajectory, you'd predict that at some point, a few seasons down the road, we're going to see things unfolding on a state-by-state or perhaps even national scope. I mean, they haven't really talked about the global question yet. You haven't seen the military, nobody claiming to be the government yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays into all this. But I find that quite fascinating because it's showing the development of how you progress from a system based on anarchy to one that's based on tyranny. So what starts off as one man bugging out in the zombie apocalypse, eventually you get to this point where we are today, where you have regional groups that are forming trade systems, you have tyrannical regional rulers that are starting to assert their power over people and extort money and resources from people. So it predicts how it would play out if there ever was a global grid down situation. And I think it's for the most part entirely accurate. If you had a total collapse of government, especially in some fashion, or if there was some civil war and, you know, basically the two sides obliterated one another, what would be left would be a temporary anarchic wasteland with pockets of communal rule of law enforced. And progressively, it would probably amount to some form of tyranny, and then that tyranny would likely be overthrown, and in the place of it, perhaps something more democratic or republican would emerge, if you will. So I find that that's one phenomenal takeaway from all of this, is how the reconstruction of society would progress. Now, there's the obvious issue here of Negan extorting Rick's group now, because he says to Rick blatantly throughout his speech that, you know, you're worth more to me alive than you are dead. Now, if I was a conspiracy theorist, I'd probably draw parallels to government here, because basically Negan is saying is that you're going to give us half your shit and you're just going to find a way to deal with it. Now, if you look at income tax and all those things, and I don't want to get political here, I'm just saying that this is one of the analogies that you inevitably must draw from this scenario, is that in order for those people to survive and not go to jail, they have to pay a tax of sorts. And that's exactly what Negan is doing. He's taxing the people. And if you don't pay that tax, you go to jail or you're punished. There really is no difference between that and the way our current system of government works. Maybe it's not exactly half, it's not exorbitant as Negan is pushing here, but it's still quite severe. He makes a very interesting point, and this is a point that you should heed, because all the people who are romancing the militaristic aspect of preparedness yet don't know how to garden, this is exactly where those people are going to drift towards. Now, I do not doubt the importance of security. The importance of security cannot be disputed. However, when a person makes that 90% of their preparedness strategy is running and gunning, then you can bet your bottom dollar that when it comes down to the wire, they're going to be a part of this tyrannical power block, because they don't know how to garden, they don't know how to cultivate resources, they don't know how to produce things, they just know how to bully people and take their money. And what better example of that is the totalitarian concentration of power in a regional authority. And Negan says, you know, I don't want to be out there weeding and growing crops and all this stuff. That's your job. And so I think this is another takeaway, is that this is going to be a reality in an SHTF situation of a longer scale. Or if there is some other illegitimate government, quote unquote, that comes to power and forces people to do things to support the effort or support, you know, whatever sort of propaganda strewn figure they throw up there. This has a very distinct possibility of happening, as sensationalist as the show is right now. And as implausible as the whole zombie pandemic plotline might be, there's a lot of truths to be extracted from this episode in particular. Now, if you go and watch my video called After the Collapse Criminology of SHTF, I have a system of 1 to 7 different types of criminal that might present themselves in that. And I made the mistake in that video of putting the number 7s before the number 6s. I think the number 7s in that were the psychopaths, and the number 6 were the conquerors. But the conquerors are actually far more of a threat than the psychopaths, because the psychopaths are like on the terminus scale, you know, very localized and not really going to have the capacity to branch out beyond that, whereas the conquerors, like the Negans of the world, are actually on that level. And the zombies really are the number 1s. You know, they're the people who are looting, stealing, people who are struggling with drug addiction, things of that nature. You know, those are the people who are basically no longer a threat in this world because they've all been either wiped out or the remaining survivors are just so hardened that they're not really a tangible threat anymore. So now as we enter this new era of The Walking Dead, and it's been called the quote-unquote bigger world, as it was portrayed in some of the posters and stuff leading up to this season, you know, Walking Dead, a bigger world, yada yada yada. You know, they showed Rick and Michonne there on the top of the mountain looking at the horizon and how it's a bigger world, and they're looking at like towns and stuff like that. So basically they're saying that civilization is starting to emerge once again, and that now we're getting broader and broader in scope. And really that's the only way the show can go and stay relevant and interesting, is if they keep expanding and expanding. So the imperialistic nature of Negan's group then really is analogous to that evolution of our own species, from the perspective of an individual or a family unit up to tribes, then to communities, then to, you know, municipalities, regional authorities. And the increasing centralization of power is what's trying to be communicated here, is that the natural trajectory of any civilization or any intelligent organism is to centralize itself at some point. Now, you may disagree with that, and that's okay. I'm open to hearing other viewpoints on that. But I played a game when I was younger. It was called Spore. And it was a big game when it came out at the time, because it allowed you basically to evolve from a cell to this species which traveled the cosmos and went and planted seeds on other planets in the galaxy, and you could terraform and stuff like that. But basically you started as a small cell that was fighting for its life against bacteria, and every time you mated, you know, there was the opportunity for you to augment some aspect of your physical capabilities, you know, so that was like the genetic mutation component of it. In this game, you start off as a cell. Eventually you grow and expand as you eat more and more, and then you become an amphibian, then you start walking on land, then you start forming small tribes. Then those tribes come together and form basically some sort of city-state. Then those city-states are consolidated into a nation-state, and then eventually all the nation-states on that entire planet are brought together under the auspices of one group. Basically, your species as a whole is unified, regardless of the diversity and all that. So, of course, an obvious thing which is going to enter this debate, which I don't care to debate, is the validity of nation states and whatnot, because obviously within this model those are inevitably stamped out. And of course you go on to explore other planets as one species, at which point you're going to encounter other species, and that us versus them mentality is going to come back again, and so on and so forth. So there's the tendency for life to centralize power. Now obviously that's just a game, but essentially that's a pretty common understanding, I think, amongst scientific thinkers nowadays, is that that's the trajectory we're on. And that's strongly exemplified in this season 6 finale of The Walking Dead, where the New World Order is starting to emerge, or Negan's New World Order, if you will. And he says something interesting. He says to Rick, you know, isn't it amazing when you realize that you just don't know shit? And, you know, when he said that, I really felt that as a viewer, you know, having followed Rick's group, them being the almighty protagonists, you know, they're always one step ahead of the competition. They're always the top dog in any battle. They always get the upper hand. And here they are in this situation where they're totally outmanned. They're totally outgunned. And you know there is absolutely no way they can get out of this situation, because basically they've entered the next level of the game. And anytime you enter a new level of the game, you're basically a noob, you're a novice, and you have to relearn a bunch of new skill sets in order to thrive in that level. And Rick's group is just, you know, a ragtag bunch of surviving misfits, basically, who are very tribalistic in their nature, and now they've encountered this regional authority. And so this is where the analogy of Rick's group as terrorists come in then, because basically you have this multinational agenda, and there are a lot of people who are against it. You know, there's a lot of different groups that disagree with the whole NWO, the consolidation of power, in the hands of multinationals or the elites or whatever you want to call them. They come in a variety of shapes and sizes. There's the religious ones, the quote-unquote terrorists are used as scapegoats to bring in more draconian legislations. That's one line of thinking. But you also have the libertarian, who is also viewed as an outside deviant. You have many different types of ideologies and religious fundamentalists who are seen as being antithetical to this NWO. And that's kind of what Rick's group represents right now. And now they're realizing, after finally confronting the face that is Negan of this new global authority, and Negan's basically trying to crush their hopes of having a way out of this situation when he says that there is absolutely no way out of this, that you don't know shit, and there's no way to defeat the NWO. Now, whether that's predictive programming, I'm sure a lot of people are going to suggest that. I'm just trying to look at this objectively. I'm not trying to push any particular viewpoint here, but I just find that it opens up a lot of discussion about this issue. Because when we're looking at how society might reconstruct itself and this whole hypothetical grid down thing, and how human beings are going to organize themselves when society collapses, basically we're trying to get a sense of how the world works right now. Because before civilization, it was shit hits the fan. 10,000 years ago, shit hits the fan was everywhere. Shit hits the fan is just the law of the jungle. And as man imposes more laws and customs and norms and mores on each other, shit hits the fan becomes lessened. So really, underneath all this veneer of civility, it is shit hits the fan. It's just sort of being held in place right now by this tangled web that we weave. So in our Apoca Talk discussions, really we're trying to understand the real world, and vice versa. Through the real world, we understand shit hits the fan. So I hope I've given you some things to think about today. Feel free to comment, join the discussion, like, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching Canadian Prepper Out. Check out the Canadian Preppers Network blog, an excellent resource for survivalists and preppers.